Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. And before I get into it with our guests here today, I'd like to remind you that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Lia Taylor on the podcast. She's coming to us all the way from Vermont. She might actually be our first person that we've ever had on from Vermont. I'm going to have to double check, but she might be. So we get something new every day here. But she's an IFBB figure pro. She's also a gym owner, a nutrition coach, a personal trainer. So she's a jack of a lot of trades when it comes to health and fitness. But she's on here to share her journey with us and, give us some tips and, just talk all things health and fitness. But most importantly, she is our current guest. Leah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I hate torturing myself, or I actually should say I love torturing myself. What is the weather like in Vermont today?
It is very snowy. It's cold. We got a huge snowstorm last week, so we got a couple feet, which was nice, but it's actually supposed to warm up and be in the 60s the next couple of days, so it's going to...
So who knows if you're even going to have a white Christmas. But I mean, I was just telling her here, we're in the middle of like a 16-inch snowstorm, so it's going to be interesting here. So I'm snowed in for the rest of the day. So, I'm more than happy to do all things podcasty today. But before we depress everyone with our, winter woes, because I bet we have a lot of people in the southern United States who just don't even understand what snow is. I hate talking to them during this time of year because, they'll say, oh, it's really chilly out here. It's 65 degrees. I got to wear a sweater. And it's like, yeah, I hate you more than life itself. Why don't you give us your backstory and what really inspired and motivated you to get in shape and how that led you doing bodybuilding and getting your pro card?
Yes. So I started pretty young. I've been an athlete my whole life. I grew up as I had two older brothers, and I played sports my whole life growing up. My parents were runners. They were very active. So I kind of grew up in that lifestyle of just being active. I started working out actually with my mom at a young age, like in 6th grade. I started going to the gym with her. And then I really got into lifting in high school. So like when I was like 17, that's when I kind of really started to get into it. And I've been competing for 13 years. So I did my first show in 2007. And so like I said, I started really getting into lifting. I met my boyfriend, now husband, and he was into it. So he kind of taught me a lot in the weight room and got me into that. And then I went to school for nutrition, and it kind of all just snowballed from there. And yeah,
So how long into your journey before you really thought about doing bodybuilding and giving that a chance?
I did my first show in 2007. I graduated high school in 2005. So I was 20 years old when I did my first show. And before that, it was interesting because I never really thought I would compete. I kind of wanted to get into fitness modeling. And, back then we didn't have Instagram and Facebook. And so I would look at the magazines, Oxygen, and I'd see, pictures of competitors in there, and it didn't really appeal to me as something that I wanted to do. And I kind of said, oh, well, maybe, if I ever compete, it'll be to help me kind of get into fitness modeling. And then, so it was at that point, I'd probably been lifting for about 3 years. Somebody at my local gym did a show in New Hampshire, and I went and watched it. And then there was one like 3 months later, and I said, I think I want to do this. And so I just went for it. I won my first show, and then it was kind of hooked from there.
That's awesome. Did you have any preconceived notions about the sport? Because if I were to ask someone in the general public, what they thought about bodybuilding, I mean, there'd be probably so many things that they'd state that are untrue. And I mean, it's hard unless you're really in the sport or into the sport that you really like see the truth about it. Did you have anything that you might be afraid of before you got started? Or was there anything that you believe, or were you always sort of, because you were in the gym so much, you kind of knew ahead of time, what it was going to be like?
I didn't, I grew up in a very small town. So I live in small town, Manchester, Vermont, and there are no other bodybuilders here. Like right now, it's pretty much my husband and I. And, there's other people who are, serious into lifting, and people who have done like a couple of shows, but not really anybody who's serious into it. And it was like that, when I first started as well. So I really didn't have people around me, and the internet was kind of my only source. And of course, at that point, it was like bodybuilding.com, like different forums. It wasn't, like I said, Instagram, what it is today. So I didn't really have the resources, even YouTube. Um, so I was just kind of learning things from different sources, and it was really mostly what I was seeing in the magazines. And I think one of the hardest things that I didn't realize was how hard it was to get like a six pack, to get to that level of leanness. I didn't realize what it actually took. Yeah, a
Unless
lot.
you're one of those genetic freaks that I hate more than life itself that are basically born with a six pack, and then you're just like, come on, screw you, man. That's just not even funny. But I mean, this is a question that I ask rarely because so many of our guests that I've had on have, gotten into the sport, recently, or it hasn't been such a long time. But in the 13 years that you've competed, in your eyes, how has the sport changed and evolved? Because I think this is one sport that's, always constantly changing and evolving.
Yes, it has evolved a lot. It's interesting to think about. Well, so when I first started, bikini wasn't out. It wasn't a thing. And then women's physique also wasn't out. So there were much, way less divisions, and the competitions were much bigger. So the figure category was, did a couple of shows where there were 20, 30 girls at a local show. Local, it was like still a big regional show, but it wasn't a national show. Um, and I remember there's specifically, I went to the Arnold Classic in 2008. And I remember it was the first time I think I had seen a pro competitor, Gina Aliotti, who was one of the more muscular figure competitors at the time. And I saw her in person, and I couldn't believe how small she was in person. So that was kind of like, wow, oh my God, it's just a totally different ball game. And to now look back at what the physiques looked like back then compared to what they are now, it's just grown and evolved. And I think with the addition of the other divisions, it only adds to that, and I think that's just the nature of the sport. They're always going to reward, what they reward for first place. If they reward the most muscular, most conditioned person, everybody's going to try to beat that, and then it's just going to naturally progress upward.
Well, and I mean, I love that you brought that up because so many people don't understand that, if you walk up to some of these competitors, yeah, you're going to be like, oh, they're a lot smaller than I thought they'd be, because I'm 6'3" myself. And I know that a lot of the female bodybuilders I have on, I've only had, a handful of ones that are even 6 feet tall. So it's like, yeah, I mean, that's just another myth too, that everyone just thinks, oh, they just must be just these massive people. It's like, no, not really. I mean, yeah, they look great. And plus they see them when they're on stage, when they're at their leanest and stuff. So I've always loved those funny stories where some people, they think that, oh, so-and-so's quit bodybuilding because they just see them in their off season and they're not like super lean down and stuff. And you're like, no, it's just a part of the lifestyle. But when you were getting started working out, I always love to make this analogy because it is, probably more accurate than anything I could say, is that, if you're to walk into a gym with 100 people, there's 100 different ways as to how those people got into shape, whether it comes down to their diet, their nutrition, how many reps they do, what exercises they do. So many little things add up to that overall package that people end up seeing. And what was that journey like for you? Because if you were to walk up to someone and say, hey, what'd you train for that body part? It looks amazing. What works best for them 99% of the time isn't going to work as good for you.
Yes. I So you're asking like what worked for me?
So how did you figure out kind of like what worked for you? Because it's a lot of trial and error, and I think that's why a lot of people quit early on, because they just say, oh, the first two or three things that I tried really didn't work as much, and then but they just got to realize that everyone's body's different and different things work for different people.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, the biggest thing is being consistent with something. And so for me, I'm just like a hard worker. It wasn't really, I think a lot of times when people are first starting out, they don't realize how strong they are, or they don't. So a lot of my clients, they're not necessarily training for competition, but they don't realize their own strength, but they also don't have the same mental drive, I guess you could say, to push beyond that point of, when it starts to get hard, it's kind of like, okay, that's it, I'm done. So the more you do it and the more you stay consistent with it, I think that's the biggest thing, is just staying consistent. And I just tried to learn everything that I possibly could learn. And I focused a lot on, I picked up things here and there. And I'm trying to think back. I don't really remember, honestly, like what I just tried to do, just to continue to get better. And no matter what, I always pushed myself. And then the more you do it, the stronger you get, the further you're able to push yourself beyond that point of, when it starts to get hard, you can push yourself deeper into that.
I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've known friends that just try to go Rambo in the gym and they say, "Oh, I'm going to train 2 hours a day," and then they last like a week because then they're like, "Oh yeah, this is way too hard." Where, especially in people my generation, where it's like if everyone who wants everything now and they want it yesterday, I mean, this is not the lifestyle to get into because you are not going to be satisfied with the results. But I love to talk genetics on this podcast because so many people are on social media and they're following others and it's, oh my God, I want his arms, I want her abs, I want their back. It's people just don't understand that you can only be the best version of yourself. I don't know how many times I want to shake down people and just be like, you don't know how they got to that look. You don't know how they've manipulated their water, just all the struggles that bodybuilders go through. People don't understand. They just think that, oh, if I just train like them and I eat like them, I'm going to look just like them. It's like, no, people are just born different. It's everything's going to, you're not going to be exactly the same. And I mean, that sort of leads me into, I mean, whenever you're first getting started working out, you always have that one body part that really, really takes off that you don't have to train as much. And then you have that one body part that just drags behind that you have to train to oblivion to get it to catch up. I'll give you my examples first. My back, just because I had jobs all throughout college of, lifting and loading boxes in warehouses where you either got a really nice back, you quit. But being 6'3", anything lower body for me is just absolutely shot. I mean, you look at me and I sort of look like the definition of a guy that only trains upper body, even though I train legs even more than my upper body. I mean, I could inject pure muscle into my thighs and they wouldn't gain an ounce. I mean, I just don't know how that's possible, but it's true. But before I make myself cry, why don't you give us your body parts? What really took off for you and what really lagged behind?
Um, I feel like I've always been like I've always focused on being very balanced. So, trying to work everything. For me, I've always had legs. So I'm a little bit blessed. Calves, I don't train calves, honestly, at all, but I've got them. So calves and legs, quads in particular, are kind of for sure my strong suits. And that's just always been. And it's not something that I didn't train. When I first started working out, I feel like I trained legs more because that's what I was strongest with. That's what I kind of felt the most comfortable with. And I kind of knew what to do. I could push myself. So I did legs a lot more, I feel like, than upper body. And then when I started to get into figure, I started to realize, okay, we want that V taper. So I started to really focus on back and shoulders and really just work on the mind muscle connection as much as possible. I would say my weakest part is, well, abs for me. Like, I don't really have abs. I don't have like a six pack necessarily. And that's always the hardest part for me. That's like where I tend to hold fat and the last place to lean out. So that's kind of where I struggle. I don't have a tiny waist. Even more so why I'm always, okay, build the back up, build the shoulders up to create the illusion of the smaller waist. And then biceps is one thing, like, I've just always kind of had. I haven't really trained them for the last year. I just started training them again, actually. So sorry.
Oh my God, she's like what she is exactly what I want to be. Now, arms come a little bit easy for me. That's just because I'm your average guy where I train them to death basically no matter what. But yeah, you mentioned calves. That is my least favorite one because that's one thing you're either born with them or you're born without them. I don't care. I can do 10,000 calf raises a day, and I'm not going to see really that much development at all. But I'm glad that you brought up mind to muscle connection because that's one thing that so many people are not familiar with. I mean, I didn't really get into that until I was really in college, and I had friends that were bodybuilders in the gym that I worked out at that really, got me into it. But I always like to have the guests explain it because, every guest explains it differently. But let's pretend that I lived under a rock and I've never heard what mind to muscle connection is. Or let's pretend that I'm a new client. How would you explain mind to muscle connection? Because it's one thing that if anyone out there is thinking about, getting started and working out, if you learn this, I mean, it's going to vastly improve your results. And I really think it's going to help you a lot.
Yeah. So this is something, and when you were talking about like figuring out what worked for me, I think that was just something I started to focus on, and I gravitated towards exercises that I felt more. So you can say like, oh, lat pull downs are going to be the best thing for your back. But if you're really not feeling it, a good connection, a good contraction, it's probably not doing much for you. So I try to emphasize this with my clients a lot. Form first. We got to get the form down. And it's very easy. And you see it all the time when you go into the gym. People are just going through the motions. They're either, using too much weight, using momentum, or they're just not paying attention and they're just kind of going through the motions. And so I try to emphasize the difference, of really, I'm always asking my clients, like, are you feeling it here in this muscle where we're trying to target? You're doing a row. Are you feeling it in your lat? And just give little tips, drive with the elbow, pull your shoulder back and down, little things that are going to help, you know, make that mind muscle connection, just help you feel it better during the workout, and during the exercise. So it's really just more than anything, it's just knowing where you're targeting for one thing, and then just trying to every single rep, constant tension, squeeze, feel it, both parts of the movement, and just concentrating, and trying to get the most out of it.
Well, one thing that I think needs to be added on to whenever someone's talking about mind to muscle is that it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, so many people think that when they learn that, it's like, oh, I'll just try that tomorrow. And then it's not, it takes people years to really develop that. And it's really body part specific. Like you could have a nice mind to muscle connection with your back. And next thing you know, you're doing squats and you might not be able to have it with your legs. How long into your journey before you think you really developed a nice mind to muscle connection overall? Because I mean, some people we've had on, it takes them like 5-6 years, and other people it's a couple of years, but you're not going to be able to figure this out overnight.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I say I think that one of the body parts that people struggle with the most is back, lats in particular, and just feeling that, because like you do a leg extension, it's like, okay, I feel my quads, like they're burning. That's kind of hard to avoid. But the lats, in the back, that's the hard part. I feel like a hard body part for people to connect to. Honestly, I don't know if I can answer that very well, like specifically, because it's just been so long that
Well, and it really is something too where you just like feel it one day and then you're like, oh yeah, it's kind of like asking someone like, when did you first learn to ride a bike? Really, I mean, it's yeah. So, but yeah, I'm just gonna say, I mean, you gave a good enough answer where it didn't happen overnight, really, and that's
I think
that's
it's progressively gotten better. Like for sure, I think it probably was at least 5 years before I really realized, like, oh wow, okay, I really need to, it's kind of taking it to the next level. Like if you're just pushing weight, it's gonna do something, but when you really focus and concentrate and try to get the most out of every single rep, it takes it to that next level. And yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on top of that too, I mean, we talked about this briefly before we started recording, is a number one myth that I love to bust. And it's gotten better the last 5 years due to Instagram, but there are still so many women that as soon as they walk into the gym and they think if they take one look at the barbells over on the side, they're going to gain 50 pounds of muscle. And it's just so not true. But did you ever have that fear when you were getting started? And I doubt really that you did, but, and even now though, I mean, being that you own a gym and you're a nutrition coach and personal trainer, I can guarantee if you got a nickel for every time you were asked that, you would probably have a butler behind you right now and probably be living in like a 10-story mansion. How do you like to respond to that?
Yeah, that is definitely a big myth. Oh, here's my
Oh, we got a dog alert. We always gotta have a dog interruption here, everyone. She
oh,
has a nice little pit bull. What's his name?
this is Odin.
Odin? Okay, that's a great name.
Odin.
God.
All right, you gotta get down, buddy. You get down. Okay.
I'm
I know.
honestly making
I
a
have two pit bulls actually.
Oh,
I've
that's all.
got
I'm making a podcast compilation where it's just clips of all the times that the dogs have been on the podcast. So yours is going to be included. So when it gets released, I'll let you know. But yeah.
um yeah, so that is definitely one of the biggest misconceptions for women. And I just try to like, listen, some people might say I'm like big and muscular, but I'm like, I've been like lifting with intention to build muscle for 15 years and I'm only this big. And a lot of people, they don't realize it until they actually start to want to build muscle, that then they realize how hard it actually is. And, besides the 1%, genetically gifted women who probably have, different genetic factors that will allow them to build muscle more easily. It's just not going to happen. So the whole like toning thing, I try to explain. So when you want to get toned, you're really looking to build muscle and lose body fat. That's what's going to give you that muscle tone. So I just try to educate and do what I can to bust that myth.
I mean, I wish that tone were erased from the dictionary because it's the dumbest word ever. Because it's when someone says tone, I always say that sort of the same thing. It's like, oh, so you want to build muscle? Because where do you think that fat's gonna go when you get rid of it? You just want to be skin and bone, basically. And if you do, I mean, more power to you. But yeah, it's just I wish people would stop using that because it's like, no, what you're really saying is muscle. But on top of that, I mean, this is something that I think impacts women so much more positively than it does men. It impacts men too as well, but it's that confidence boost that working out gives you. I mean, we have heard hundreds of stories on this podcast of women who have, they've either made life-changing decisions, it's maybe helped them become more assertive, or it just helped them better their average everyday life because that's the one thing that you can take from the gym and use to impact your life in every single way. How have you personally taken that confidence boost that working out's given you and use it to impact your life?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I honestly have had a pretty rocky road, or at least the first few years that I started competing, I had a pretty rocky road. I wasn't like overweight to start with. But I did my first show and I didn't have a coach. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was taking tidbits of information from different places and applying them all to myself, which now looking back, I realized, okay, that was like probably one of the worst things I could have done. So I'm taking them out of context, applying them to myself. Anyways, I got, into decent shape. But then I, was not prepared for what was to come after that. And I gained back 30 pounds pretty quickly. And it kind of started this roller coaster of yo-yo dieting, you could say, but using competitions almost as a way to like get in shape again. So I kind of hit a point in 2010 that I was like, okay, my body was like, that I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And then I started to take the steps to kind of recover my body. Took some time off and allowed my metabolism to kind of heal and and then I progressively started to compete again and just keep things a little bit healthier and had guidance. And so since that point, just being the feeling of being strong, it applies in so many other areas of your life. And just and I hear this from my clients all the time too. I was just talking about it with a couple of ladies who do some of my classes in the morning from the gym, because we had to shovel all this snow last week. So it just makes you feel, you don't really realize it because building muscle and getting strong, it's a slow process. But when you do start to notice outside of the gym, that you're just like stronger doing everyday things and feeling strong, it just makes you feel, it's different than the feeling of like, fitting in your jeans, because that's good too. But just the feeling of being strong makes you, I don't know, definitely more confident. And it just gives you a whole different outlook.
Well, and can I say, shoveling snow is one of the best back workouts you will ever get in your entire life. I mean, people who are not from the northern part of the country where, I mean, we get a lot of snow. Yeah, I have, once in my life, I made the idiot mistake of shoveling before a back workout. Next thing you know, I was only able to lift, like 75% of what I was normally doing for a back workout just because it is so tiring. So anyone out there who's just looking for a workout, I mean, get out there and shovel snow next time there's a snowstorm. But the most important thing when it comes to this lifestyle is nutrition. I mean, so many people don't understand that. They don't realize that. What were some of the bigger nutritional changes that you made personally in your journey when you started taking things seriously and leading up to now? Because I mean, just like with working out, your body's going to end up getting used to whatever you're doing, and then you're going to have to mix things up.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is like finding what works for you. Everybody is very different. And when it comes to competition, it's like still the same. You have to find a coach. If I could do one thing differently from that first show, I would have hired a coach. Um, because I was just like, and at that point I had already gone to school for holistic nutrition, but it wasn't, competing, getting on stage, getting your body fat, super low is like a totally different thing. So, um, yeah, I'd say I learned a lot just about how to do things, not to go like all the way to the extreme right from the start, um, and just taking things one step at a time, because that's how you can kind of get yourself into trouble. And there's really no need for it. And a lot of people, they're eating however many, calories, say 2,000 calories a day, and they drop right down to 1,000. And like, yeah, you're going to lose a lot of weight pretty quickly, but where do you go when you stall from there? So starting to like take those baby steps and just, incrementally make changes. Um, for me, I don't want to say my problem, my challenge is I really love food. I love to eat and I'm a picker. So that's one thing that I have to kind of reel in when I'm in contest prep, is just trying to keep it to my weighed out meals. And um but again, the biggest thing is consistency. I think that's, finding the foods that work for you. If you have sensitivities, if you notice that certain foods don't make you feel good, you need to pay attention to that. And just finding those foods that work. There are no magic foods. And that's a big thing. I think people, oh, fish and asparagus, that's going to like, there's a lot of myths out there. You need to eat that like, for whatever 12 weeks leading up to your show. There's lots of foods that you can eat, and the more that you can keep it palatable and keep your food tasting good, the better off you're going to be in the end. You're not going to be miserable, and it's going to get hard, but if you're eating like there's no reason to eat bland food. So learning to cook, learning to prepare some basic meals. One thing that I have found that's really helpful for me in staying consistent is just having kind of like base, like my go-to meals. I pretty much eat the same thing most days, and I just kind of will swap things out here and there. And that just took me a lot of years to just try different things and get in the habit of, um, pairing certain foods and trial and error. But consistency, whatever you do, try, if you don't give it enough time to see how it's working for you, you're never going to know what's working and what's not. So I think consistency is the like number one.
Oh, if there's anything that anyone takes from this podcast, yeah, it's be consistent. I mean, that's with really in all aspects in life, and especially in nutrition. But the one thing that shocked me the most about this lifestyle that, I was aware of before I started the podcast, but I didn't realize how big of a problem it was, is that for so many of these bodybuilders, posing is the hardest thing for them. I mean, it's harder than your nutrition. It's harder than your working out. I would have never guessed it in a million years, just because I'm one of those people who's just like, oh, I can just do a front double bi and I can do all that stuff. And, it doesn't seem that hard, but no, there's so much more to it than meets the eye. And I like to compare it now to being a perfect driver, where you can be a great driver. You can never be a perfect driver. You can be a great poser. You can never be a perfect poser. It's always ever evolving. What has your experience been like with posing over the years?
Posing for me, it actually came somewhat naturally. I am a dancer, so I feel like I can, and I taught myself how to pose. I didn't have any help posing really until like last year. So I feel like I just would watch videos, and I would, I can easily apply things to myself and learn that way. So I did practice, but I feel like I was able to pick it up fairly quickly. But when I did start, there's always, like you said, there's always changes. There's always, tweaks that you can make, and taking pictures, taking videos, that can really help, because when you're just watching yourself in the mirror, it's always different when you see yourself from a different point of view. But crazy the illusions that you're making with your posing when you're on stage, and if you're taking into account where the judges are, and how you're angling your body, and you know, just positioning it in certain ways just to kind of make it appear a certain way. So when I started to work with Kenny Wallach last year, he really made some tweaks that I was like, wow, like this feels really weird. There's no way this can look good. And then seeing the pictures, it's just tiniest little tweaks. I'm like, holy crap, wow, that's a lot different. Um, so yeah, it's kind of an ever evolving
Hmm.
thing, but it was never a massive struggle for me. I've always been comfortable in heels, and um, yeah, so that part was.
I'm just shocked every time someone mentions that Kenny Wallach is their posing coach, because there's been like hundreds of people on this podcast that have said that. So he has like a monopoly on this posing thing, where literally it's just like everyone's trained by Kenny Wallach. I can't wait till he comes on the podcast, because I'll just tell him, I was like, dude, how did you become like this? Where like everyone, especially females and males, you're like the go-to posing coach, where everyone's like crawling to get to you. So yeah, but that's awesome. But a pose that, I mean, out of like the 40 or so figure girls that I've had on this podcast, a pose that is by far the hardest, because I usually ask what's the easiest and hardest, is flaring those lats. Was that something that was difficult for you, or was that something that came natural for you? Because especially for women, I feel like that's a hard thing to do.
It is. I feel like it once I got it, at first, and I've coached other competitors, on how to do it, and at first it's like a really weird thing to get, but once you get it, once you feel it, okay, this is what it feels like. Um, it kind of becomes a little bit easier. But even this year, I mean, it's definitely like Kenny made little tweaks to try to get my back, looking wider. And it was like, something I wouldn't have thought again would make a big difference. And it really did. So it's not always, what you think, and what feels natural isn't necessarily what looks good. Um, so I think the other thing too with the lat spread is the more of that mind muscle connection you have, and just with posing in general, the easier it is, because you can control all of those things a little bit better.
Yeah, and mind to muscle connection is way more prominent, I think, actually in posing than it is in the working out, just because that is really everything when it comes to that. But I always ask this to pros that I have on the podcast, because so many people don't understand that for a lot of these guests, winning that pro card is the highlight of a lot of people's careers, just because that is the affirmation that all that hard work that you've put into the gym, has paid off, and you're a pro now. What was that moment like for you when they announced your name and you realized, oh my god, I'm a pro now?
It was pretty surreal. It was so this just happened last month, and it has been a 13-year journey for me. And literally after that first show I did in 2007, I kind of got hooked, and I was like, I'm gonna want to be a pro someday. I didn't think it would take me this long, and honestly, I feel like if I had been guided properly from the start, I probably would have gotten it sooner, but I wouldn't have learned as much as I have learned going through those ups and downs. So it was crazy. I mean, I knew after prejudging kind of that I was like in that first or second spot. Um, but I was trying not to get my hopes up. I was, incredibly nervous going into finals. But it was just kind of, it was surreal. It was crazy, because I was just like, "Holy, I did it! This is." It took me a while for it to like really sink in, but yeah, it was just crazy.
Well, that's awesome. And I mean, that another myth that I love to bust on this podcast, though, is that so many people don't understand that that look that you present on stage is not a sustainable look. You're not going to be able to look like that 365 days out of the year. And so many people, I think, try to do that if they don't have a coach or whatnot, and your body's going to suffer. I mean, let's just be completely honest, because you are not in your healthiest when you walk on that stage. I always said, if they were to have like a strength contest or like a push-up contest or anything like that on the stage, people would be shocked at the results. They'd be like, oh, they look like that, and they only do like 30 or 40 or so, because you're not at your strongest. You're at your weakest to make yourself look, as toned as possible and as shredded as possible. But What was that like when you first realized, like, hey, this look is not something that I'm going to be able to maintain. I'm going to have to put on weight. And I know you talked about how you struggled a little bit at first, putting on, like 30 pounds after show, which is a thing that we hear of all the time, which really shocked me when I was really digging into the sport. But has it gotten easier for you to accept that fact as your career's gone on of, like, hey, this look is, only temporary at best. And, I am going to have to put on weight afterwards.
Yes, absolutely. I think that was part of why I struggled so much at the beginning, because I wanted that look. I wanted to be lean all the time. And I started to use the competitions as a way to keep myself in shape because I wanted to look like these fitness models. Um, and so it wasn't until I really kind of hit that like rock bottom place with my body. And then even after that, for years, like a few years after that, um, that's still what I was kind of chasing. I was like chasing the pro card, but I wasn't happy competing. I was never happy with how I looked. And as soon as I gained weight, um, and so for me, my struggle was always conditioning. And I was like, I kept falling short. Like every time I stepped on stage, I wasn't doing well at the national level. I did my first national show in 2012, and I was like always last call outs. I think the highest I had gotten at nationals in 2013, I placed or was that 2012? Anyways, I was 13th place. And at that point there was like 30, plus girls in my class. So I was happy with that, but I never got to that like true stage conditioning that I needed to be at to be competitive. And it was actually more of a place where I like felt good to almost maintain, but then I would, fall off afterwards and I would gain weight back. And then I would be really emotional and really down on myself. And then I like trained for another show. So it wasn't until now looking back, what I needed was to take longer breaks in between shows. If I could go back and change that, I would definitely do that. So I did my last show in 2016, and I was kind of like, okay, this is like, I need to take a step back. I like completely just stopped following the sport. I just needed to like chill, take my mind, my focus somewhere else. And I just changed up the way I was training and just tried to like just like kind of reboot and clear so I took 3 years off, and I just enjoyed life. And that was probably the longest time that I had maintained my weight. And I just focused on myself and kind of loving myself and feeling good in my body and being at that little bit fluffier place, and kind of appreciating that. And so after that, I didn't even know if I was going to compete again. So at the end of 2018, I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna train for show next April, and this might be my last one. And I then started working with the coach that I'm with now, Andrew Barry, and started to train, and got into the best shape I've ever been in. My body was responding, and more than anything, my head was in the right place. I started to then compete for the right reasons. So after that, I won that show. I won the overall, and then I went on to do Junior USA's. I got second place there, and then I did Junior Nationals and got fifth place there last year. So by far my most successful season competing. And then I was looking forward to actually gaining some weight back, because I actually got to that stage level conditioning, which is absolutely not sustainable. And, everything that you do leading up to the show to like peak for that day. And this is what I try to tell people too. I like tell my clients who don't really know much about it. It's just, and this is something I didn't know, like back when I first started. I didn't have anybody telling me this. Like what you see in pictures and what you see of these people on stage, like they only look like that for a very short time. And even the, models on the covers of magazines, it's an unrealistic. They're usually coming off of a show, or they've, dieted specifically for that photo shoot. Um, so anyways, it just, yeah, it took me kind of a long time to find that balance, but so much of it is up here. It's in the mindset.
Oh my god, you read my mind perfectly, because this is so much more of a mental game than it is a physical game. And it's unfortunate that most people that in the general public do not understand that, because they'll just see you walking down the street and, oh my god, Leah, you look amazing. They only recognize the physical changes. They don't recognize the mental changes. So this whole journey, I mean, it's so much more mental than it is physical. But you are a gym owner, and you're one of probably like the 10 people that I've had on the podcast that own a gym. So I love to ask, what got you into it? I mean, how long have you owned it? Tell us about owning a gym, because that's something that very rarely people on the podcast can tell me.
Yeah, so the gym I own, it's a small gym. Again, I'm like here in Manchester, Vermont. So it's a small town. We're pretty much the only gym in town, which um and it's actually the same, it's not the same gym business, but it's the same building that's been like different gyms. So growing up, I grew up here, and I used to do gymnastics there when I was little. And then the gym that I first started training at, and it's actually where my husband and I met. So, anyways, that gym kind of went out of business, and then somebody else came in and opened the Manchester gym, and we had started working there, right from the start. So my husband, I, and then our other business partner, um, have all been there from the start in 2009. And then he kind of was very hands off, the owner, and so we were kind of all running it already. And he sold it to us. When was it? 2006? No, 2014. We're going on 7. Now I'm losing track. Like 7, yeah, 7 years. And he sold it to the three of us. So it was a pretty smooth transition. And yeah, it's going well. So.
Well, and now I got to ask too, because the big elephant in the room is the coronavirus. I mean, it's something that's impacted our lives in more ways than you can ever imagine. I mean, especially in your line of work, where, I mean, all the stuff that you do really has been one of the more impactful things that it's been impacted by this virus. How have you been doing during this pandemic? How's your gym been doing? What's that whole story like? Because I find it so fascinating. Like here in Minnesota, our gyms are closed again until like mid-January, but it's always evolving in every single place of the country. But it's specifically, how has the coronavirus impacted you?
It's been challenging. We got shut down in March, and we immediately started doing virtual classes. So we do a lot of group fitness classes, and we rented out some of our equipment to local people. And so we kind of just did the virtual classes going through. So we continued to do that to just keep as many people as we could doing something, and just kind of keep that momentum going. And we're actually still doing those virtual classes. So there's still quite a few people who are, haven't been comfortable to come back into the gym since we've opened. And so they continue to do that. So it's been a little bit of, I don't want to say a good thing, but a good thing in that sense that we were able to open up this other avenue for people. And then we have some people who have second homes here who are now able to do classes. I have a woman who does my Zumba class, and she used to come every time, Saturday that she was like in the area. And now she's on for every class because she can do it from home in Connecticut. So we reopened June 1st. We luckily have not been shut down again. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that it stays that way. And here in Vermont, we kind of have had the lowest numbers out of the country through this whole thing. So we're just hopeful that it stays.
That's one of the benefits of living in a small state with a small population too. That's what I got to say too, because my dad was from a small town of like 200 people. So I know that small town kind of vibe, which is, a lot of Vermont. So, but that's awesome that you're able to, maintain that gym even throughout this, and, do virtual classes, which is what something that I think, a lot of people have done. But yeah, if anyone, you're in the Manchester area and you need a gym to train, I mean, looks like they're one of the only gyms in town. So, definitely go and check that out. I'll leave all their information down below if anyone else is interested. But the last couple of questions before we wrap things up that I ask, every single health and fitness guest is, if we were to walk up to you and say, Leah, for some reason you were granted the all-knowing power of being able to change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding and everyone would go along with it, what would be one thing that you'd most want to see changed about the sport of bodybuilding?
Ooh, that's a good
Yep,
question.
we saved the golden ones for the end.
Oh, no. Feel unprepared. Um, oh goodness. I think the hardest part is the subjectivity of it. Um, and it's just hard to know sometimes why certain things. So I think if there were a way, I don't know how you'd really go about this, but if there were a way to add some sort of objectivity to it to know, I mean, you can always get feedback from the judges, about what to do better, how to improve. But it's hard because I think at the end of the day, you have to always just be with it being subjective and the judges, in the judges' eyes, you have to always be doing it for yourself, because it is a personal sport and there's so much that goes into it and there's so much that leads up to, that show day that you have to ultimately be happy with why you're doing it and, enjoy the process. I think if I could change one thing, I would say, more money. Having avenues at least to make more money, because it's very expensive to compete, and I don't even want to know how much money I've spent over the last 13 years competing between, just everything leading up to the show and then just the fees to go travel to the shows. And so if there was some sort of, better prizes at least, or it doesn't have to necessarily be money, but that would be something.
Well, that's another thing that the general public does not understand too, is that, you're not going to make money in this sport unless you're like number one at the Olympia, really, or anything like that. Because yeah, this is a sport where you're going to lose money, which makes it even more impressive to me. Because I was like, oh, these people are actually paying to go on and get judged and all that stuff like that. I was like, oh, if only I could come up with a business model like that. Are you kidding me? I'd be the next like billionaire basically. But yeah, it's not a sport where you're going to be making money, and that's just what again, like I said, what really adds a lot more to it. But if we were to talk to you a year from today, now again, if we were to have talked a year ago and you would have predicted a global pandemic and everything that's gone down, I would have called you a liar and bet my entire life savings against it. So go so much to show we know what's going to happen. But because who knows? We could be talking a year from today and you could see a fire in the background. You could hear gunshots. Who knows what the world's going to be like a year from now? But in an ideal world, where would you like to be at in your bodybuilding? Where would you like to be at just in your overall life? What are some goals that you'd like to have achieved if we were to talk to you a year from today?
Let's see. I'm not planning on doing a pro debut until probably at least 2022. Just going off of, what I've learned, I know now that the longer breaks in between shows, the better. And it just gives me time, physically for my body to just kind of level out and get back to baseline and heal and then work on body parts that I want to improve. But then also mentally just, I need to live life. I need to have that balance. I know some people, some competitors, it's bodybuilding all day, every day, which is great, but I need to have that other balance. I like to, have a beer, go out to eat. I need enough time for me to just kind of live that balanced life. So I'm starting to put a little bit more focus into my online nutrition coaching and really working with women who have struggled with yo-yo dieting and helping them kind of break through that physical and mental barrier, so that they can lose weight for good and break that cycle. So that's where I'm kind of channeling my coaching efforts. So I would like for that to be off and running and more successful than it is now. And hopefully the gym will still be up and running and course, I'm hoping 2021 is going to be a better year than 2020, which I'm sure it will.
It's a pretty low bar, so I mean, it's gonna be, unless there's like an alien invasion, I think it will be better. But yeah, I mean, I think you're gonna do great too. I mean, and taking a year off, obviously, I mean, I totally support that because I think so many people they, just compete nonstop and then it just wears out their body and then they have such a shorter career than they could have. So we wish you all the best in that. But I'll leave a link to all of her stuff down below. And lastly, is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely want to shout out to my coach, Andrew Barry, for all of his help. And um, yeah, I just wouldn't have gotten to where I am this year without his help. And that's a big thing, is just having a coach. Even like being a coach, I think everybody can benefit from having a coach. So you don't have to like worry about making decisions and be inside your own head. So, my husband, Dan, for all his support, absolutely. And Kenny Wallach for all his help coaching me with the posing and being there for support. And um, yeah, just everybody who has supported me along the way. And yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's awesome. And again, you guys, we cannot thank her enough for coming on and sharing her story. And again, links to everything down below if you're interested in that. And again, you guys, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing out. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.